got to come out of the ocean to form clouds. We've
Yes.
established the fact that there's CO2 in the ocean. And by the way, you're waving your arms around and so am I. We're accusing CO2, so we're all guilty.
We don't emit that much CO2. Compared to the oceans, I can tell you the fact is...
So if there's CO2 in the ocean, and that's forming cloud formation...
No, the clouds aren't formed from the CO2 in the ocean. They're formed from water vapour that evaporates from the ocean.
Water vapour. CO2.
Water, no.
No, just
it's
water.
Water vapour. It's made up from water. It's in the name.
Move on to the next question. Yes.
So there is CO2 in the ocean.
I think we'll have to put your question on notice.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank
Put your
you.
question.
Next question.
Tim's done his very best to answer the question.
Yeah.
If we could just take, is someone else? We bring that down the front, and the lady here, just in the second row. Thanks.
My question is to Lord Monckton. I just wanted to ask you, is it true that the CO2 in the atmosphere surrounding Mars is also increasing despite no industrial revolution on Mars?
That's a very good question, to which I must say I haven't recently looked at what's happening on Mars, but I know that there had been some dry ice at one of the poles, and there's less of it there now, which assumes it must have gone into the Martian atmosphere somewhere. And yes, of course, that is all those SUVs that NASA is sending up there to explore the planet.
There you are. We'll stay close, just behind you, the gentleman there.
My local council of Alliance in New South Wales is spending a lot of money and preparing to spend a lot more on the belief that there is a need for an emissions trading scheme in Australia. Worse still...
Could we just have a question? Because, look, there's a lot of people. Just ask the question, if you would. Yeah.
Contemplating going into carbon market trading. Is there a need for this to happen, Lord Monckton?
Thank you.
No, is the short answer. The long answer is there are two things you can do with an ETS. You can either set so low a price for the right to emit a ton of carbon dioxide that it doesn't make much difference to how much people emit, in which case there is no benefit to the climate at all. Or you set so high a price for the right to emit a ton of carbon dioxide that you shut down industries all over Australia, and you are very vulnerable to this because your industries are heavy industries like mining, like steel working, aluminium working, and agriculture, which have quite heavy carbon footprints, if that's what floats your boat. And so if you set a high price for the right to emit a ton of carbon, then you will be closing your own industries down and transferring the business to places like China, which I can tell you for free are not going to have an ETS scheme, and they will set up the jobs there. And let me give you an example of this, because we've already done an experiment in this. The commissars that now make 90% of the laws of the United Kingdom, the EU commissars, have decreed that we shall have an ETS scheme throughout Europe. This has resulted in Tata Industries, with which Dr. Pachauri of the IPCC is intimately connected, closing down a steelworks at Redcar in the north of England. I've just been asked to go and speak there to the steelworkers just before it gets closed down, because the British government will get carbon credits for closing down a heavy emitting industry. The fact that it destroys 1,700 jobs being neither here nor there in the new metric, that steelworks will then go to, well, where does Dr. Pachauri come from? India, that's right. It will go to India, where it will be set up, and another set of carbon credits, exactly the same, will be granted to India, because that steelworks, although it will be the same steelworks as it was in the UK, will be more efficient than anything they've got there now. Now, the net effect on the planet is, of course, absolutely zero, except for the carbon emissions caused by the cost of transferring this steelworks from one side of the world to the other. That is what actually happens in the real world if you have an ETS scheme and other people don't. And since you have no control over what other people are going to do, and since the Chinese government has made it repeatedly plain that it is not going to impose any such regime on its own people because it's got to lift them out of poverty, it is going to go on opening coal-fired power stations at quite a rate of knots, notwithstanding its recent letter to the Secretariat of the UN Convention. The effect will simply be to shut down the economy of Australia, and on this graph here, for absolutely no climatic benefit whatsoever. It is pointless and as lunatic as that.
Thank you, Lee. Right up the back. Thank you, yes.
Thank you. To both speakers. In 1976, the UN apparently drafted a treaty, of which there's over 100 signatories, controlling the use of weather modification technology. Now, if in 1976 there was a UN treaty banning the use of weather modification technology, a subject by which when I was 10, I had a project on with the CSIRO, etc., that they had been working on anything from cloud seeding to changing whole regional temperatures. If this is in fact a fact, why aren't the authorities using weather modification technology to enhance the situation instead of leaving us all in fear? Haven't all our taxes and all our hopes been the dream of science solving these problems? Well, in 1976, apparently, they had been playing with it in many nations to the extent and to the detriment of certain populations. Why aren't we using this supposed UN treaty and investigating the real technology that's behind perhaps regional climate change, which is beyond this scope of this discussion, and in a far more sinister way, perhaps in a military sense and on a political grand scale that we're not even focused on? How is it that we can't use this so-called subject of this treaty, this special technology, to solve our fears and problems?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's most probably a little bit removed from what we're talking about today, but does either of the speakers have a comment?
No. Very briefly, no.
Okay, over the other side of the room, yes, thank you.
My Lord, ladies and gentlemen, I've always wanted to say that. The ocean level rising, this is directed to Tim Lambert. The ocean level's rising, and the ice sheets are melting. Bad news is that the sea level will rise by many metres, according to the information, around the Sydney coastline. Does this mean, Tim Lambert, that the good news is that one of the first things to go underwater will be the desalination plant?
I think that's both a question and an answer. Yes, next. Thank you.
Thanks very much for all being here. Nick Gallagher from Mount Colah, the leafy suburb of Mount Colah.
The leafy suburb of Mount Colah, thank you.
One of my concerns is we should be all careful of the environment, but I'm sceptical about governments and other institutions using this as an excuse just to tax us more. We've already paid enough already, and where does all the money go?
Right, I think...
Have we got any,
well, that's an economic question. That is a very valid economic question. Lord Monckton?
Where does the money go from the extra tax they raise? Well, it goes into making bureaucrats and pollies and bankers richer. Does any of you want that? No. Thank you.